Call an ambulance. Hurry up. My husband, who always irritated me, collapsed on the floor, sweating heavily. The paramedics arrived quickly, checked his condition, and put him on a stretcher. Then they turned to me and asked, "Are you his wife? Can you come with us to the hospital?" My husband, lying on the stretcher, looked at me with pleading eyes. I looked back at him and said firmly, "No, I will not." "What?" he said, sounding confused. "This man is a stranger to me, so I am not coming." "What?" he repeated. "Please take care of the rest," I told the paramedics. "Wait, Julie, wait," he called out. I pulled out something I had been carrying in my pocket for days. When he saw it, his face turned even paler. "How dare you treat me like a slave all these years? This is my revenge. I will never forgive you." My name is Julie. I'm a 37-year-old housewife living in a rented apartment with my husband, Scott. I met Scott through a colleague at work when I was still employed full-time. My colleague had many friends and often invited me to parties. I'm more of an introvert and prefer watching movies or cooking alone. I wasn't comfortable with large group activities, so I kept saying no. One time, a colleague invited me to a barbecue with his friends. At first, I refused as usual, but my colleague insisted, and I ended up going. On the day of the barbecue, there were so many people there. One of them was Scott, who later became my husband. I was having a drink a little away from the group when my colleague brought Scott over to me. My colleague said he thought we should meet because we had similar interests. I was surprised, but Scott started talking to me. He was nicely tanned and clearly liked the outdoors. When I talked to him, I found him to be friendly and funny. I thought Scott and I, who both preferred being alone and indoors, wouldn't get along. But as we talked, we found out we had common interests, just like my colleague had said. We hit it off right away. We exchanged contact information and made plans to meet up on our next day off. We went out for dinner and shopping several times and ended up dating. After several years, Scott proposed, and we got married. Scott had always been kind to me, even before we started dating. He was the ideal man to take me out of my indoor lifestyle. That didn't change after we got married, but over the past few years, he started to say and do things that made me uncomfortable. I quit my job and became a housewife because Scott wanted me to. However, he often made sarcastic remarks about it. For example, when I got sick and was late cooking dinner, he came home and said, "Hey, why isn't my dinner ready yet?" "Hi, sorry, I was sick today. I had to rest earlier and couldn't get up. Can you take a bath first?" I replied. "Huh? What's that? You're a housewife. You should at least take care of the meal," he said. Scott never worried about my health, which made me very sad. Another time, I asked, "Hey Scott, there's a reunion coming up in my hometown. I'll finish my chores, so can I go?" "Suit yourself. Well, being a stay-at-home wife is great, you know," he said sarcastically. "I envy you, Julie. You could play around with the money your husband makes. He's usually so nice to me, carrying my purse and bringing me flowers after work. But sometimes he acts like a jerk. I even thought maybe he wanted me to work, so I suggested taking a part-time job. But Scott insisted that wasn't the case. In the end, I was still a full-time housewife. One day, one of Scott's relatives called me out of the blue. I picked up the phone, feeling a little defensive. The relative on the other end of the line called my name in a panic, saying, "Scott's mother has collapsed." I froze for a moment at the unexpected news. According to my relative, she had gone to visit my mother-in-law a few hours earlier and found her lying in the yard. She called an ambulance, which rushed to the scene and took my mother-in-law to a general hospital. I prepared myself in a panic and ran out of the house. When I arrived at the hospital, I was told her condition was still too unpredictable. As we were talking about this, Scott came running in, out of breath. We moved to the hospital room to check on my mother-in-law. She was lying in bed, covered with various tubes, and it was painful to watch. "Mom," my husband called out to her, but of course she did not respond. Scott stayed in the hospital room for the rest of the day, and I decided to go home and get everything we needed for the hospital stay. After a while, my mother-in-law recovered enough to sit up by herself. However, she still needed help with everything. I'm glad she's able to get up. I wonder if she will be able to walk again if she continues her physical therapy. When my mother-in-law's discharge date was approaching next week, I mentioned it to Scott. Then he started to say something I didn't understand. "Oh yeah, are you ready? We'll be leaving this house next week, so you'd better start packing our stuff." I couldn't understand what he meant. Scott seemed annoyed, as if he didn't like my reaction. "We don't need this house since we're going to live with my mom at my parents' house. You are still as dense as ever, aren't you? Does that mean I'm going to live with my mother-in-law after she gets out of the hospital?" I never heard anything about that. What? Did you decide to move in together without talking to me? Have you already canceled the lease on this house? I asked, feeling shocked and upset. My husband became even more grumpy. "Of course, I've already canceled the lease. It's the right thing for us to do as a family, to live together and help her." "Don't tell me you don't want to live with her, do you? I'm the one who makes our living, so I won't accept any complaints," he said, then stomped back to his room. I couldn't believe Scott would take such a hardline approach. I can't believe he's canceling the lease on this apartment. I had no choice but to move out. I knew he was worried about his mother, but this was too much. I sighed deeply. A few days passed, and suddenly I was living with my mother-in-law. I had never been a caregiver before, so everything was new to me. I had to spend most of my day feeding, bathing, and helping my mother-in-law with the bathroom. My mother-in-law didn't want me to take care of her, and she hardly communicated with me. When I tried to talk to her, she would hide in bed, saying she was in pain. When my mother-in-law was healthy, we didn't have a bad relationship. In fact, we sometimes exchanged delicious-looking snacks we found at the department store. Perhaps she was too frail to care about others now. On the other hand, my husband Scott, who had forced us to move in together, rarely came home. After work, he would go out for drinks and come home in the morning. Even when he had days off, he would find some reason to go out. When he was home, all he did was play video games in his room. One day, I decided to talk to Scott while he was playing games. "I know you can't avoid working overtime or drinking with your colleagues, but can't you at least help me take care of your mother when you are at home? Or I would like you to help me with the housework," I said. Scott replied without looking away from the screen. "What are you being so naive for? Housework and caregiving are both your jobs. I'm tired from working, you know. Oh, I'm almost out of coffee. Go make me some. And clean this room, okay? And oh, take these to the dry cleaner. I need them by Friday." He spoke one-sidedly and threw his work clothes at me. This time, I was annoyed and retorted, "That's enough. I've been doing housework and taking care of your mother every day for the past month without a break. Why can't you at least help me a little?" Scott then slams the game controller down on the desk and stands up angrily. "How dare you talk to me like that? Who do you think you owe your livelihood to? If you have a problem with me, then get out. Come on, get your stuff together and get out." Well, I feel sorry for my mom. She's going to be left alone without anyone to take care of her. I couldn't say a word. It's true, I only have a little money saved up, and I can't leave my mother-in-law, who can't do anything for herself. I held back, picked up his suit, and left the room. After about 5 months of this difficult life, my mother-in-law suddenly passed away. I woke up in the morning and went to check on her like I always did, but that day she was no longer breathing. I called an ambulance and took her to the hospital, but it was too late. Scott was in tears, but I couldn't cry. I felt cold when I saw Scott crying. I thought to myself, you didn't do anything to help her. When I realized that I didn't have to take care of her anymore, I felt a sense of relief. I felt guilty for feeling that way. Time passed quickly. After the funeral, I suddenly realized that 3 weeks had passed since my mother-in-law was gone. It was time to organize her belongings. After my husband left for work, I started cleaning my mother-in-law's room. I put her favorite clothes and accessories into cardboard boxes one after another. There weren't many, so the work was over soon. Next, I opened the cabinet by my mother-in-law's bedside. There was almost nothing in it, but there was a big can on the bottom shelf. I thought I had seen it somewhere before. It was a can of assorted sweets I had given her when she was still in good health. I wondered why it was there. I opened the lid of the can and found a letter inside. When I picked up the envelope, I saw it was addressed to me. It read, "Dear Julie." I quickly opened it and looked inside. In trembling letters, there was a message for me. "Julie, I am sorry for making you take care of me. I was ashamed of myself for forcing you to work for me every day. I was also ashamed of my son Scott. I know how badly he treated you. Julie, you should leave him and live your life the way you want." My mother-in-law knew everything. She knew her son was selfish and that I was suffering because of it. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "I am glad I was able to spend the last days of my life with you, Julie. Thank you." At that moment, I cried for the first time since my mother-in-law passed away. It felt like everything I had been holding back was flowing out of me. I cried and cried until my tears ran dry. Then I made up my mind. I would divorce my husband. 12 days had passed since I found the letter from my mother-in-law. My husband was still treating me like a slave. "Julie, I'm missing one of my socks." "Where is it?" "Oh, and take my car to the car wash today." "You've got nothing to do, right?" He was going out with his colleagues for golf. I guess he completely forgot, but today was our wedding anniversary. Well, I didn't care about it anymore. "What are you going to do while I'm golfing?" "You can't just sit around, you know. You have to prepare dinner, clean my room, and clean the bathroom. You have a lot to do." His arrogance left me speechless. "Hey, you hear me? Bring me my sock and a jacket. Hurry up, or I'll be late." At that moment, Scott fell to the floor, clutching his stomach. He was in pain and sweating. He told me to call an ambulance, his words coming out with difficulty. I froze, feeling sad about the situation. Scott yelled at me, "Hurry up, you're really useless. Can't even call an ambulance." Hearing these words, I became strangely calm. Then I called 922, and within minutes, an ambulance arrived with paramedics. The paramedics quickly checked Scott's condition and placed him on a stretcher. They turned to me and said, "You are his wife, aren't you? Would you come with us to the hospital?" Scott looked at me with pleading eyes as he was placed on the stretcher. I looked him right in the eye and said, "No, I will not." I said it firmly, without hesitation. "What?" Scott's voice came out as if he had lost his mind. "This man is a stranger to me, so I am not coming. Please take care of the rest," I said firmly. Then I confronted Scott with something I had been carrying in my pocket for the past few days. It was the divorce papers that I had been forced to sign during a fight a while ago. My husband had always told me that if I disobeyed him, he would serve me with the divorce papers. Scott tried to snatch the divorce papers from me, but he couldn't move due to the pain. He had to lean back on the stretcher without any effort. "Excuse me, but please leave now," I told the paramedics, who finally took my husband away. In the ambulance, he must have looked like a poor husband whose wife had given him a divorce. He should be embarrassed. I watched the ambulance leave and then went back to the house. It took a long time, but the divorce papers were accepted, and the divorce was officially finalized. While Scott was in the hospital for a week, I was busy packing my belongings and sending them to my parents' house. One day, I ran into Scott at the grocery store. He looked desperate. "Julie, please don't do this to me. You love me, don't you? Please don't leave me. I admit I've made some mistakes. You listened to me no matter what I said, so I just got carried away," he said, looking completely pathetic. "The divorce is already finalized. It's too late for you to act so fragile. Go ahead and live your life as you please," I replied. He looked shocked, his hands shaking and his face turning pale. "Well, that's that then. Bye," I said, turning away. It had been 5 months since Scott and I had divorced. One day, Scott showed up at my parents' house. He was ringing the intercom and calling out my name so loudly that I had no choice but to see him. Sure enough, he wanted me to get back together with him. "Julie, please, I can't live without you," he pleaded. I looked at him and shook my head. "Scott, we're done. It's over. You need to move on," I said, trying to stay calm. He looked like he was about to cry, but I had no sympathy left for him. He had made my life miserable for so long, and I was finally free. Scott didn't give up easily. He kept coming back, trying to talk to me, trying to convince me to give him another chance. Each time, I stood my ground. "No, Scott, we're not getting back together. You need to accept that," I repeated over and over. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt a pang of guilt, moments when I wondered if I was being too harsh. But then I remembered all the times he had belittled me, all the times he had made me feel worthless. I remembered the letter from my mother-in-law, and I knew I was doing the right thing. One day, I found a new place to live. It wasn't much, just a small apartment, but it was mine. I moved in, set up my things, and started a new chapter in my life. It felt good to be in control, to make my own decisions without anyone telling me what to do. I found a part-time job at a local bookstore. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to get by. More importantly, it gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. I made new friends, started new hobbies, and slowly I began to rebuild my life. Scott eventually stopped trying to contact me. I heard through mutual friends that he had moved to another city, started a new job. I wished him well, but I was glad he was no longer a part of my life. Looking back, I realized that leaving Scott was the best decision I had ever made. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of courage, but it was worth it. I was finally free to be myself, to live my life on my own terms. And that was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself. When I kept quiet, he began to tell me about his current life. "I can't cook because you always did all the housework," he said. "Now, I only eat TV dinners or go out to eat." He admitted he had gained 20 pounds since the divorce. It was clear to see the extra weight on his face and stomach. He went on, "I don't know how to do laundry either. My shirts are wrinkled and smell bad, making me look dirty." It was true his clothes were a mess, and he looked unkempt. "I finally realized how much you did for me, Julie. If I don't fix this, people at work won't respect me," he said, starting to cry. But I knew those tears were just to make me feel sorry for him and get me back to being his servant. There was no way I was going back to that life. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police," I said firmly, treating him like a stranger. Scott got scared and left the house, crying. "I'm sure he won't bother me anymore. At least, I hope so. My ex-husband seems to be having a hard life now, but I am doing quite well. I stayed at my parents' house for a while, but now I rent a small apartment and live alone. My standard of living is lower than when I lived with Scott, but I enjoy having my own time and space. I thought it would be hard to find a job at my age, but a friend of mine knew someone who was retiring, and I got a job to take her place. I feel so happy to spend time and money only on myself without anyone telling me what to do. From now on, I want to take care of myself at my own pace. It's the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I have learned to enjoy the little things, reading a book in peace, cooking my favorite meals, and decorating my apartment just the way I like it." Scott tried to contact me a few more times, but I ignored him. Once, he showed up at my parents' house, ringing the intercom and calling my name loudly. I had no choice but to see him. He pleaded with me, saying, "Julie, please, I can't live without you." I looked at him and shook my head. "Scott, we are done. It's over. You need to move on," I said calmly. He looked like he was about to cry again, but I had no sympathy left for him. He had made my life miserable for so long, and I was finally free. I started making new friends and picking up new hobbies. I joined a book club and started taking yoga classes. I even took a cooking class and learned how to make new dishes. My life was finally my own, and I loved every moment of it. One day, while walking in the park, I ran into an old friend from school. We talked for hours, catching up on lost time. It felt good to reconnect with people who knew me before I was married. It reminded me of who I was and who I wanted to be. Looking back, I realized that leaving Scott was the best decision I had ever made. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of courage, but it was worth it. I was finally free to be myself, to live my life on my own terms. And that was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself. Every day, I wake up with a sense of peace and happiness. I am no longer bound by someone else's expectations. I am living for myself, and it feels wonderful. I am excited about the future and all the possibilities it holds. From now on, I will take care of myself, follow my dreams, and live my life to the fullest. This is just the beginning of a new and exciting chapter in my life. I am ready to embrace it with open arms.